I'll go ahead and introduce our guest. I met Steve Elkins the summer of 2022 in Zuni, New Mexico, and Albuquerque, while Steve was doing research on pre-Columbian maritime explorations of the Americas. We met through a common friend, John Rushcamp. Steve's insatiable curiosity and persistent nature have allowed him to see the world as few do while working as an Emmy-award-winning cinematographer. Steve's efforts to find the fabled lost city of the monkey god are a mix of mystery, political intrigue, high adventure, scientific innovation, and the willingness to carry on regardless of the risks and roadblocks. Steve's exploits are featured in the New York Times best-selling book, The Lost City of the Monkey God by Douglas Preston, which is now in 24 languages, as well as major media around the world, including National Geographic and The New Yorker. A new featured documentary is currently on Discovery Plus. Steve was noted as one of 100 leading global thinkers in 2013 by Foreign Policy magazine, and is a fellow in the Engineers Explorers Club, for which he was recently awarded the Citation of Merit for his work. I could probably go on, but with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Steve, if you're ready.
I'm ready. I'm just going to go to the share screen here.
Okay.
Give me a second. I'm going to make sure it's all optimized. All right, so I'm going to start off just a 2-minute trailer to our documentary. For those of you that know absolutely nothing about what I did or the project, maybe some of you might have read about it in the past, I have no idea. But here's a 2-minute trailer to give you a little bit of insight before I go on.
Who's afraid of the curse of the lost city?
The mythical White City, where an ancient civilization once thrived.
It seems to have inspired everybody to try and find out, does it exist or does it not?
We're headed through very dangerous areas controlled by drug cartels.
We're just getting over a coup in this country.
Here we are under the spotlight. Who are these guys? What are they here for?
Ciudad Blanca is a place of great riches and treasure. We would have been marked as treasure hunters coming to steal Honduras' cultural patrimony. Legends are part of the Honduran national psyche.
You just mentioned a name, Ciudad Blanca. You can see the fear go across their faces.
We've got a technology that makes it possible to see what's in a large area.
We're shooting laser pulses out of the bottom of the plane. If something is there, we'll see it. Those are absolutely, without question, archaeological ruins. It's a site.
This is what we're looking for.
When you fly over this valley, you look down, it looks like a tropical paradise. But when you're actually in it, you realize that this is a really unfriendly environment. We are not welcome there.
Whoever goes in, they cannot make it out alive. So maybe that's why it's been so secretly safe.
Some people's bug bites didn't go away.
The parasite's killing everything.
It's absolutely terrifying.
Something told me that there's more to the story than meets the eye. Wow, look at this.
All right, well, I hope everybody understood that and it played okay. Richard, did it play?
Yes, it did. You kind of have a little echo right now.
Oh, maybe I need to turn off my sound or something. Huh? Well, that's no good. Then I can't hear you.
No, I think it's good now.
Okay. All right. Well, now that you know that this lost city, it's a legendary place. It was in the country of Honduras in Central America. What I'm showing you now is a map made by the British in the mid-1850s, showing what they knew about this area. It was in the eastern part of Honduras in a place called the Mesquite Jungle, and they called it the Portal del Inferno, the gates of hell. Is there a problem? I heard somebody say something.
No, that's fine.
Okay. It was a very difficult place. This legend started 500 years ago with the conquistador Hernan Cortez, who first came there, the first Europeans there. And he had heard legends of a fabulous place out in the jungle. Maybe the local people told him that to get rid of him, who knows? But he tried to find it and couldn't. And since then, for the last 500 years, there's been a number of people, including 3 expeditions from the Smithsonian in the 1930s, trying to find this place, and nobody was totally successful. People would find enigmatic evidence, or they find some other settlements, but never the place that somehow matched the legend. Well, in the early 90s, I was in the television business and liked science, liked history, looking for something to do, and a treasure hunter, raconteur, adventurer told me all about this and got me interested and said, why don't you come with me? I'm looking for it, and you can film it. So in 1994, that's what I did. I went there. By the way, this is, right, wrong button here, sorry. This is one of the groups from the Smithsonian in the 1930s who were looking for it. They look like they're right out of an Indiana Jones movie, very nattily attired. Notice the big machetes, the guns, everything. They did not find it. At the same time, this is from Fortune magazine in the 1930s. This became such a big legend all over the world. Everybody wanted to find this place. By the way, it had many names. It was called Lost City of the Monkey God because it's believed that they worshiped monkey gods, which makes sense because it's in the jungle and they got monkeys. It was also called Ciudad Blanca, meaning White City, because allegedly the buildings were made out of white stone, which also made sense because the rocks there are carbonate rocks, limestone, which can have a gray or whitish cast. So in this ad for Camel cigarettes from the 1930s, if you look at the center right, it says explorer Captain R. Stewart Murray. He was out there looking for the lost city, and he was so happy he had his Camel cigarettes because he never would have made it without them. I think it's kind of hilarious that this is what happened back then. Oh yeah, here's a close-up of that. Well, another fella named Theodore Mord in the late 30s in 1940, he was an adventurer and actually worked as a spy for us in World War II. He went out there saying he's going to find it. And he went and came back with all kinds of artifacts and claimed to have found it. And the New York Times ran an article, and an artist made this rendition of what the lost city of the monkey god looked like. Probably was influenced by the movie King Kong, which had recently come out at that period of time. Now, Theodore Mord, everyone believed him, and he died after World War II. He killed himself, never revealing where it was. And we found out through our research, we were able to get a hold of his records, found out that he never found anything. He bought the artifacts from local indigenous people, and what he was really doing was going there looking for gold, which he did find but got wiped out in a hurricane. But I guess he got a lot of money from the Smithsonian to send him there. And, I guess perhaps he thought he was going to be found out to be a fake. Maybe that's why he killed himself. But that was in the 1950s. So it attracted a lot of characters. This gentleman was a bona fide exploration geologist out of Santa Fe named Sam Glassmeyer. He was the real thing. I love his outfit with the pith helmet, the cigarette, and the pistol in his belt. He did all kinds of explorations. And in 1959, he decided as a lark to go looking for it. He spent 3 months and he found a site. He thought it was the lost city of the monkey god. It turned out that actually was another place, but it was a pretty good, interesting place. This is the fellow that originally told me the story. His name is Captain Steve Morgan. He fancied himself a captain, but he really wasn't. But he was a good storyteller, kind of a handsome guy, and he wore a captain's hat, and it looked a little bit like the guy on Captain Morgan Rum. So this is the fellow that told me the story that got me interested to go in the first place. This is Steve's buddy who became our fixer, and I used him throughout all my times in Honduras. His name is Bruce. He grew up with Steve in St. Louis, and Bruce was an interesting character, shall I say. He could get anything done or anything you needed in Central America. He knew how to deal with people, and you can tell by looking at him, he had a rather menacing demeanor. So it was always good to be on his good side. The first time I went there was in 1994, and we went old school style. we spent days and days in these dugout canoes going up these river systems, then having to hike looking for this fabled lost city. We had some indigenous guides. We had Steve Morgan, Captain Morgan, thinking he's knowing where to go. And we did a lot of hiking. We had a great time, but didn't find too much. After a few weeks, this is what some of our crew looked like. I'm in the back, leaning over like the Leaning Tower Piazza, totally exhausted. The fellow in the front that looks like he's stoned, that was our indigenous guide, and he probably was stoned, probably eating some plants. Now, we fortunately came upon this petroglyph in a very remote part of the jungle up on a mountain stream. We saw this, and we had, by the way, we had a government archaeologist with us. We had to do that to get permission to go, who then outlined the petroglyph in chalk so it would become visible. And it turned out to be quite an interesting carving, as you can see. It looks like a man with some kind of a hat or mask, a stick, and a gourd, maybe perhaps with seeds coming out of it. We had a big argument. Was it a farmer or was it a shaman doing some kind of ceremony? And maybe those aren't seeds coming out. Maybe those are stars. We really don't know. But what I did know is this was in the middle of nowhere. We couldn't see 20 feet in front of us. And I said, wait a minute. If there was no lost city out here, there was nothing going on, there wouldn't be this sophisticated of a petroglyph in the middle of nowhere, particularly if he was farming, because there's no way it looked like you could farm there now. So at that moment, I had an epiphany, and I became obsessed with trying to prove or disprove whether or not this lost city really existed. Now, on that same trip back in '94, we also heard a legend of a village, an isolated village with people that had 6 fingers and 6 toes. And I said, bullshit, I don't believe it. So we went there, and sure enough, you can see it. This guy's got 6 fingers. The whole village had 6 fingers and 6 toes. And I think it was a lot of inbreeding because it was quite an isolated place. Those fingers really didn't do much. It just kind of flopped around. Now, it quickly became apparent to me that just walking through the jungle with machetes is kind of like the blind leading the blind. You're not really going to find much unless you happen to stub your toe on it. So I made several expeditions in the 90s. I learned something, but I never could find a city. So fast forward a number of years, all the way to 2010, I read about this new technology called airborne LiDAR, which is kind of like sonar or radar, but you do it from an airplane and you send out hundreds of pulses per second of laser beams. And they go to the earth, they bounce back to the plane, and it creates the 3-dimensional model of the surface. And you can actually tell what part of the surface you want to look at. So you can erase all the vegetation and just look at any bumps and lumps in the ground to see if anything looks like anything. So in 2012, we mounted an expedition with the LiDAR plane, and we spent about 10 days flying around different targets that I had identified by my research, hoping that this would be the way to find something. And this is the plane. And inside is our LiDAR engineer, who actually was from Honduras, but he lives in Houston now. And you can see we're just flying a pattern back and forth, kind of like a sit-down lawnmower. Now, Honduras, as many of you may or may not know, is kind of a rough place, a lot of narco activity and crime and so on, particularly back in 2012. So we were required to hire 7 Marines to guard our aircraft all the time, particularly because that LiDAR machine was worth over $1 million. And the permit we had to take it out of the country, it was controlled by the State Department, required that we have soldiers guarded all the time. We were able to ensconce ourselves in a very posh resort on Roatan Island because it was too dangerous to have our plane on the mainland. Roatan's 45 miles off the coast. And we would fly the plane every day across the water and then do our scanning for 8 hours or so and bring back the data. And the engineers, some of them sitting there by the laptop, would process the data overnight. And that's just part of our group looking at it. And then one day, voila, we're looking at the data, and then they processed it overnight. And the engineers came running to me at breakfast and said, I think we found something. I ran there, I saw it, and this was my expression. I was rather overjoyed because we had spent a lot of money, I spent a lot of time, and I really would have looked like a fool if we didn't come up with anything. Well, this is what we saw. This is the LiDAR data. False colors, the green are all the trees and bushes, and the blue is a little river that runs through there. And believe it or not, you're staring at the lost city. But of course, you can't see it because looking at the trees is like, just the trees is like looking at a piece of broccoli. But with the magic of technology, we could erase all the vegetation, and it looks like this, kind of like the moon. And if you look, I'll do this other picture to highlight some of the structures. You could see a bunch of rectangles and straight lines. There's even a pyramid to the right of the square that I didn't highlight in color. And there's a whole bunch of structures. And so when we saw that and the archaeologists saw that, we went, okay, we hit pay dirt. This is pretty darn exciting. It turned out to be about 2.5 miles long and a half mile wide. There's another LiDAR image we could create. The big lump on the lower left, that's the pyramid. And you can even see a little bit of like a ramp going down into a big plaza. This is a three-dimensional view of that plaza created by LiDAR. We can rotate it around, and we can actually lift the trees out and see the foundations. It's pretty cool stuff. All right. This is what that same area, again, looks like in real life when you're looking down. Now, you can't see a darn thing. It's just that the head of a piece of broccoli with the little purple trees in there, which are kind of pretty. But no place to land. You can't see anything. Well, we had some Honduran help. We had some helicopter pilots to help us out. This was one of the Honduran military pilots that flew us around. And you could see his attitude about flying over the jungle. I thought it was pretty hilarious when he came up with that helmet. Because the problem is if anything goes wrong, there's nowhere to put down. Which was a problem. Because if we wanted to go to actually ground truth the city, even though we could see it in LiDAR, we had to actually want to go there. It's too far to walk, especially with equipment. So we had to find a place where we could put in a helicopter. And our original plan was that we would fly down, rappel out of the helicopters, hack away some trees, and make a landing zone. Well, we thought, let's look at the LiDAR data. And we found this little stream that had a natural clearing in it. And you're looking at a cross section, then you're looking at a bird's eye view on the left. And we could actually measure the height of the trees, the width of the trees, the depth of the water, and everything else. And it was apparent we could put a small helicopter down. We'd not have to rappel. And from there, we could cut a few trees down to make it more room for bigger helicopters. It was a real lifesaver and the beauty of LiDAR. This is what that original landing zone looked like as we're making the first approach. Not exactly a wide open space, but enough to put a small helicopter in. Plus, the water is kind of shallow, so we could have actually just put it in the water, too. Well, once we got and unloaded our people and equipment, we had to set up a camp. So this is our camp. Very inviting. We put up a sign, welcome to the Four Seasons Mesquite, UTL landing zone. We had a company called Under the LiDAR that we put together to finance this operation. This was our main tent where we had our meals. And you could tell it's a rainforest because it's very soggy and very wet and very muddy, and that's what it was like all the time. This is part of our crew after an exhausting day. I'm over there on the lower right, ready to pass out, and other people are a little more chipper than I am. These were our accommodations, my tent. We spent a couple weeks there. Very nice. We had 2 sets of clothes. They were always wet, but one was dirty and one was clean. It would get dirty during the day. You'd hang it up on that clothesline, it'd rain all night. It would be wet, but it would be clean, and then you change your clothes. Now, just because we set up a camp, we still had to make our way, I don't know, 1/8 of a mile or 1/4 of a mile to the actual site. And this is what the terrain was like. We had to hack our way through the brush to get there, and that took quite a bit of effort. This fellow here was one of 3 British SAS jungle warfare experts that I had hired to make sure that we stayed alive. And he was very good at cutting the brush with his machete. This was our head American archaeologist as we're trying to ascend one of the pyramids that we eventually found. You can't tell it's a pyramid because it's just a steep hill full of mud and plants. We tied ropes and planted some stakes in there so we could haul ourselves up. It was rough going. In addition to having to negotiate the uphill and downhill terrain, we also had to go through these mud holes, which were really what I would call quick mud, kind of like quicksand. So believe it or not, if you stayed too long in that mud hole, you would actually sink. How far, I don't know. None of us wanted to find out. However, we had an anthropologist with us who was short, and she got stuck in there and actually started sinking. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of that because we were too busy figuring out and getting her out of the muck. She probably got well beyond her waist. The easiest way to traverse some of the terrain was in the streams, which we often did like this. And here we're looking pretty gnarly after many days. Over on the far right is Oscar, who was the chief Honduran archaeologist, looking a little grumpy that day. And behind us, we have an American archaeologist, a woman behind Doug Preston, the writer, some Special Forces Honduran soldiers, and myself. Now, if you look at my screen right pocket, you'll see my iPhone that I used to take a lot of pictures and keep a diary, had a waterproof case. And unfortunately, on this particular day, I didn't close the charging port to the waterproof case, and I trashed my phone. I was not a happy camper. I found this joke in New Yorker magazine, which I thought kind of showed what modern exploration is like, and with phones. I think it's pretty funny. We're doing old school stuff, but we got to find a place to charge those electronic devices. Here I am looking at the main pyramid that we found in the city. Now, I don't think any of you could tell me where it is because I could barely see it. It's hidden in all that brush. While we were walking around for days, we had the LiDAR data on what looked like a giant cell phone. We could walk around and we could just follow the satellite beeps, and it would say over this way to the pyramid, make a left, go 100 yards, there's the plaza, make a right and go over here, there's another building. And we'd find foundations, which was great. We could see everything we saw at the LiDAR. But after a while, you get kind of tired looking at just building foundations. Well, after a long, hot, rainy day, we're walking back to our camp. I had a cameraman to record everything behind me. And he trips and he goes, "Hey, Steve, there's all these funny looking rocks here." And I run back there, and this was the first funny looking rock we saw. And immediately we all thought, this is the monkey god. We found the lost city of the monkey god, because it kind of looks like an ape-like creature. But it actually turned out to be what they call a weird jaguar. So it's a sort of a shamanistic, half human, half or part ape, part jaguar creature. In addition to that, we found 54 other carved stone objects. This is after we had cleared some of the brush so we could see it better. All these bowls and figurines carved out of basalt. Really beautiful stuff. Here's some more of it after we cleared it. I mean, 54 of these just sitting there right in the section between the base of the pyramid and the main plaza. So obviously these were put there for a reason. Now, one of the problems in this rainforest is it was pretty primeval. The animals, fortunately, it was kind of like going to the Galapagos Islands because the animals were not afraid of us. The jaguars would come in the middle of the night, roam through our camp, the peccaries, so on and so forth. They could care less. They avoided us, except for this guy. This was a fer-de-lance snake. It's the most venomous snake in the Americas, 1.25 inch fangs. Pretty nasty stuff. And there happened to be a lot of them near our camp. On the first night, Doug Preston, the writer who came with me, went out to go use the facilities outside his tent. And he ran into one of these guys who was not very happy. And fortunately, the fellow you saw with the machete from the SAS came out and killed him. But he was spewing venom and squirming all over the place. It was pretty scary, because if you get bit by one of these guys, you're probably at best going to lose the limb that got bit. Now, most people think the snakes, the jaguars, and everything else is the most terrifying animal in the jungle. But in reality, it's this guy, a little tiny sandfly, which is like half the size of a mosquito. This is a picture of him having his meal, taking some blood up. Well, it turns out that in this little valley where we were, it was very isolated for God knows how long, there was a protozoan parasite called leishmaniasis, which developed there, its own unique species. And it lives in the gut of that little sandfly. And when it pokes its proboscis in you to get the blood, the protozoan flows down into your bloodstream. And you get 1 million bites. This is my legs. We had 1 million bites. You could not prevent it. This is one of our crew's bite on his knee. Just looks like a bad mosquito bite. But a short time later, it looked like that. Really gross. So this leishmaniasis, what happens is it goes into your bloodstream and your body says, invader, invader, send all the white blood cells to kill it. The problem is in most people, the white blood cells can't kill it. And in fact, the parasite reproduces inside the white blood cells. So it's saying, bring on more of those white blood cells. Because instead of 1 protozoan, now you got 100. Instead of 100, now you got 1,000. And your body doesn't know what to do with them. And it's actually, this lesion is a reaction of your body actually destroying itself in an attempt to destroy the parasite. Now, unfortunately, there's no cure. There's no real cure for this parasite infection. But some people are immune. I happen to have been immune. 40% of us were, but 60% were not, and are being treated by the National Institute of Health and being studied by them because it's an important disease for our military, and actually 12 million people a year around the world get some version of this. This particular fellow, after a couple months, he healed up and he just has these scars, and he's been okay. But some of the other people have not. 2 almost died, and others, including Doug, the writer, get recurring lesions all the time. There's no permanent cure at this point in time. Now, after we went there and we proved that the site was there and everybody was excited, the president wanted to come out and see it. That's the guy in the white shirt with, of course, his bodyguards and all of his whole posse and archaeologists and so on and so forth. We had to make a bigger landing zone for him. Now, strangely enough, this president, who was very good to us and helped us out, a young guy, he's only about 51 or 52 now. He is currently in jail in Brooklyn for drug charges. It seems most Latin American presidents, after their stint as a president, wind up going to jail for a while. So we'll see how long that happens for him. But that's why it's difficult to arrange things in countries like this. You have to dance with a lot of devils in order to make it happen. Well, once the president came and he gave the go-ahead and we raised some more money, we started serious archaeological research. And here's the team out working, doing proper excavations. You can see many more artifacts are being found. And to date, they found probably close to 600 or 700 stone artifacts. They've done carbon dates going back 4,400 years ago. And just the other day, I was talking to the archaeologist in charge. We had found inscriptions on some of these sculptures, which I'm going to show you in a little bit. And nobody could figure out what they were. At first, somebody said, well, these are just decorations. Well, I saw them and I said, they look like storyboards to me. And I think those of you that look for petroglyphs could understand this. They were different patterns separated by double vertical lines, just like in a cartoon or something. I said, there must be a meaning to it. Well, they finally figured it out. And they're saying that it looks very much like very early Olmec script, which would make sense if this site is thousands of years old. So this was an early form of writing that they were doing on some of the artifacts. They also found a numbering system. Here's the archaeologist doing a little more work. These are one of the better bowls that I always liked. They have, I guess it's a snake or something, snake heads, but very beautiful. And I would look at these made out of solid basalt, wondering, how long did it take to carve this out? How did they do it? It must have taken a long time. And what if you spent a year making this thing and then you broke it? You want to kill yourself. This artifact is of a, what is it? What's the bird that eats carrion? A vulture. It's a stylized vulture. This was found in the center of hundreds of artifacts in that one spot. And according to the archaeologists, the vulture represents death and rebirth. So the theory is that when the city was abandoned, they brought a lot of these artifacts to this special spot and they put them around and they put this guy in the middle to symbolize the death and perhaps eventually a rebirth of the site. So it's a very important figure. Now here are some of those inscriptions that actually turn out to be a script. On the bottom is what they call a sky panel from one of the Mayan sites in Mexico. It's on the vertical face of steps going up a big pyramid. And I outlined in red two of the symbols, which are actually the same, very similar symbols on this carved stone. And these actually have different meanings, of which I'm not quite sure I understand what they are. I just learned about it the other day. But there's numerous different carvings with different kinds of geometric figures set up like this. You can see the double parallel lines separating each figure. So it's like a storyboard. And to me, this is exciting because maybe we'll be able to understand what they were trying to say. This image is an artist rendering that they made with the help of the archaeologists, sort of an idea of what the town probably looked like when it was people were living there. So you can see there's a big pyramid off to the right, and then you have smaller pyramids and mounds for buildings, some farms, terraces, and so forth. The president was so happy, the guy who's now in jail, with this, that he had a museum built just outside the jungle. You can see it's the Center for Investigation in Ciudad Blanca. It's very nice. He set up an archaeological curation lab and exhibits for people to come visit. So I was very grateful that he did this. They even issued postage stamps. Another name for the city was called Cajakamasa in the indigenous local language. Ciudad Blanca, White City, Cajakamasa means the same thing. So they made these two stamps, which I personally was quite excited about, because never in a million years did I think anything I ever did in my life would be on a stamp. Well, here it is. Douglas Preston, the fellow with the gray hair on the right, is a pretty well-known author. He brought him along. Smartest move I did, because he wrote a book about the whole thing, which became a big seller. So there, Doug, myself, the president of Honduras, and the U.S. ambassador at the time at a celebration when the book first came out down in Honduras. The book became a worldwide bestseller. This is a friend of mine in Yakut, Siberia, in the dead of winter with his copy of the Russian version of the book. But it's, as Richard had said, it's in 24 languages. It's in many, many countries around the world. But I like this picture because Yakut, Siberia is one of the coldest places in the world, so far removed from the jungle. And here's a Yakut, he's a native Yakut, reading that story. It became a big sensation in Honduras. They put me on all their talk shows, which is interesting because I don't speak Spanish other than tres tacos, por favor. But somehow we managed with interpreters and had little earbuds with immediate translations. And I went on all the talk shows for a couple of years. It was crazy. Became such a big deal that a group of young software engineers in Honduras made a video game all about it. This was their promo picture. A musician, a composer in Honduras, made a musical about it. I mean, who would ever think anything like this would come of all this? It became a cultural sensation. And here in the States, I don't think it's around anymore, but a couple of years ago, there were these escape rooms. I think there still are escape rooms, but they made one of this was from one in Boston. And it apparently did really well till COVID. Now the Hondurans knew this was a good thing, and they promoted the heck out of it. And they also wanted to teach their young about their heritage. So they put together a traveling educational show where they had 3D replicas of artifacts. And I went to the first one. It was very rewarding to see how excited the children were. And I saw this little boy staring at the artifact. And to me, this was the biggest payoff, because who knows the thoughts going on in that child's mind, what he's thinking about. Maybe it inspires him to do something. Just 2 weeks ago, another book came out written by Sandra Markle, who's a very well-known writer of educational books for kids. It's called Secrets of the Lost City, a scientific adventure in Honduran Rain Forest. It's for kids 8 to 12. It's really well done. You can find it on all the normal online booksellers. It just came out. And in fact, tomorrow I'm going to Albuquerque, where my daughter-in-law is the principal of the school. They bought books for the school, and I'm going to give a little presentation to the kids, and they're all excited about it. So if you have any young ones in your family, you might want to check it out. It's really well done. And I was very proud that I had nothing to do with it. The writer approached me and asked me if I could help them write the story. And it's a great legacy to have something like that. Now, one other thing happened down there, as I said earlier, it's almost like being in the Galapagos, because no people were living there. The animals were not afraid of us. And then the rainforest itself was just full of all kinds of wonderful natural surprises. As you can see, the trees grew quite large. The canopy was 150 feet tall, triple level. It's about as big as you can get. Unfortunately, flying around, we noticed this: deforestation caused by narco lords who were clearing land, putting cows in there, trying to confiscate the land. It was a real travesty. Well, we thought it would be a good idea if we brought in some really bright wildlife biologists to assess the jungle and make sure it was as wonderful as we thought it was in terms of the flora and the fauna. So we brought in about 15 biologists that Conservation International put together, and they spent a few weeks doing an assay, and they eventually wrote this 200-page report. And they found animals that they didn't know existed, plants and animals, and species they thought were extinct were alive and well there. So it turned out that this jungle was a gem, and it turns out it's also the heart of the wildlife corridor between South America and North America, a very important part of the global ecosystem, which is unfortunately being threatened. And if it fails, has set off a cascade of negative events ecologically. This is some wildlife cameras we put out, and it shows the jaguars walking around, which is why the city that we found was renamed officially Ciudad del Jaguar, because there were so many jaguars around. And it got away from all the myth and the legends, and we're naming it for the jaguars and to try and promote the fact we got to keep these places going. Another species that was very important to find were these white-lipped peccaries. I call them the buffalo of the jungle. It's just my own term. They roam around in herds of about 200, and they literally turn up everything. They just go through the jungle like a tractor. But they're very important ecologically because they turn over the soil and they start the life with the small organisms, which the bigger organisms eat, and so on and so forth. They're also the favorite prey of jaguars and the favorite prey of humans. So if you see white-lipped peccary, that means there's no hunting going on. Otherwise, they're gone. They're the first species to go, and then the jaguars go. So we're happy to see very healthy herds of this animal. Knowing all this, with the government, we set up a foundation, the Caja Camasa Foundation, to try and protect the rainforest and keep the archaeology going. We were making great headway until COVID came. And when COVID came, everything kind of stopped. And there wasn't much in the way of military patrols. People were getting sick. And the narcos started building a road. Fortunately, it didn't come to our site, but they destroyed quite a bit of jungle. And now it's starting to turn around again. So it's a tough story. This is a little video I want you to watch for a second. The little ecological message that you probably all know, but I think it's good to...
I have had people say to me several times recently, well, the Amazon, that's so 1980s. When I got into this business in the 70s, people would say, who cares about the Amazon? We have to worry about population growth. So now when people say to me, who cares about the Amazon? We have to worry about global warming, climate change. Well, guess what? It's all the same thing. Overpopulation drives environmental destruction, which drives climate change. The first essentially global report of climate change was 25 years ago. The Kogi Indians of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta in northern Colombia said, hey, what are you knuckleheads doing down there? Our glaciers are melting. And everybody thought, ha ha ha, isn't that cute? Look at those funny little white hats. But that was a report that the climate was changing. We didn't listen, and we failed to listen at our peril. People need to be interested, because look, whether you're interested in changing climate, whether you're interested in too many poor people, or whether you're interested in drug-resistant bacteria, which is a much greater threat to our species than climate change, deforestation, terrorism, nuclear weapons, you have an interest in the greatest expression of life on Earth, which is the rainforest, which is home to most of the world's terrestrial biodiversity. And if you look at the record, 80% of our antibiotics come from nature. And as a student of history, I know that history often predicts the future. So where are the best antibiotics waiting for us? In the rainforest of today.
That was a video of a friend of mine, Mark Plotkin, who's a famous ethnobotanist. He came along with me, made a couple years ago, and I think it's very compelling, and especially with what's going on in the world today, everybody can relate to it. Now, before I wrap it up, I want to show you a couple of petroglyphs that I think some of you might be interested in. This first one, this was in 1994 at the Mayan city of Copan in Honduras. It's in their big pyramid in the middle of the city. It was first being excavated then, and I was able to go in these tunnels, just like an Indiana Jones movie. And here is a sculpture, what eventually turned out to be a bas relief of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. So in this same tunnel, which unfortunately I don't have a picture of, I went down into a chamber and there was a figure, a head, it was probably a king. But to me, it looked like a Buddha. It looked so Chinese, I couldn't believe it. And I stuck it in the back of my head. And about a year later, I was in Washington, D.C. at a conference, and I met the head of archaeology named George Stewart for National Geographic, who was working in this project. And I said, did you see that figure, that head? And he said, yeah. I said, doesn't it look like a Buddha to you? And he said, yeah, it looks very Buddha-like. There needs to be more research between the ancient Chinese and the ancient Mesoamerican civilizations. He said, I think there had to be some cultural contact there. It's too many similarities. So keeping that in mind, that leads me to my current project that I'm doing. And John Ruskamp, who's one of the people in the audience there, has been helping me, and so did Richard, in looking at pre-Columbian maritime contacts with the Americas. And we're finding out that people traveled all over the world by boat for thousands of years, contrary to what all of us our age were taught in school. Now, this next picture, if anybody has an idea, this was a petroglyph that I found in Honduras. Everyone I've showed to the world, nobody has a clue what this is. They all make up some kind of baloney about it. But it's the wildest thing I've ever seen. Maybe one of you have an idea.
Yes, that does look like some of the petroglyph plans we're finding here in Arizona and in New Mexico.
Yeah, well, maybe they all came over and they had a conference. I don't know. It's really a strange one. And this last one, which the archaeologist working at my site just pointed out to me, this is a numbering system. It's very similar to the Mayan and Aztec numbering system, which uses straight lines and little dots. So the 4 dots and then the lines and so on. So what number this represents, I don't know. You could look on the Mayan or Aztec numbering system, and you can get some ideas if it means the same thing. But it's kind of exciting that these people at the site that we found had a numbering system and they were carving it in stone for some reason. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and show my smiling face and take any questions if I get my cursor to work here.
Well, Steve, that was a real adventure. I'm speechless. I don't know what to say.
Well, I hope I didn't bore anybody. It's a lot of stuff to say in a short period of time.
No, it was a very...
Chinese, who's the person with the Chinese?
What's that?
There's somebody who's viewing it who's got their name in Chinese.
I don't see that.
I see it. John, do you see it?
They came in about halfway through.
Who is this? I wonder if
Could that be Walter Coe? I did share this with Walter. He's Chinese, lives out there in California. I'm not sure if that's him or not.
Well, anyway, if he decide, whoever it is, if they decide to say hello, it'd be nice. If not, it's okay. You can hide behind your Chinese name.
Could ask him to unmute himself.
Yeah. Well, we don't know if it's a he or a she. I can't read Chinese, so I don't know.
Did you tell Bing about this? Steve, did you tell Bing about this meeting?
I don't know if I did. I don't remember.
Okay, well, I will be, I'm recording it and I will be sharing it on my YouTube channel, so people will be able to see it at a later date.
Okay. Well, I guess somebody must be a PC person. Their name is Windows.
Well,
That was a tremendous presentation, Steve. Kudos to you for all of it. I learned a lot, and I have just a much greater appreciation for all the background research and hard work you put into that project. It's remarkable.
You read the book, so you know the story already.
Well, yeah, but seeing it like this, wow.
It really brings that book to life.
Who's talking?
It was Ira.
Turn on their cameras so we could see who's talking.
Okay.
Maybe nobody wants anyone to see anybody. All in their pajamas.
Hello.
Hi, Ira. So
I
you
read the book too. Oh yeah,
Oh,
yeah. And that's why I was super interested to see your side of it. But that LiDAR is just absolutely exciting.
Yeah, well, there's so many stories involved in this. It could take hours to tell them. There's so many funny anecdotes. I mean, I'll tell you one that most people like. So if you remember the big heavyset guy, Bruce, the fixer,
Right.
I showed him in the beginning. Bruce. So he was a real pinky ring, gold chain kind of guy with a 45 in his ankle holster. You know, that's how he got things done. And he, back in the 90s, I got my financing from a broadcaster in Germany. The CEO was an adventurer, and he said, I'll give you some money if I get to go with. And I said, sure. He was from Germany. And we're out in the jungle with those dugout canoes. And he had this early satellite phone in a big briefcase. He'd open up under this big aluminum umbrella. We'd look for a hole in the trees, and he'd call Hamburg and go, like, what's going on? And he had some disaster, and he had to leave. I said, we're in the middle of the jungle. But we didn't have cell phones. We had radio relay with walkie-talkies and battery-operated ham radio sets. And I got a hold of Bruce, who was not in physical condition to do a trip like this, as you could tell, and said, we need to get this guy back to Germany. Can you arrange it? And he said, for the price, I can arrange anything. He said, just be at this village in 2 days. You can make it there. We go to this village. A plane comes, lands on a grass strip. It's twin prop held together with duct tape, right out of a movie. Completely full of people holding animals in their laps. Bruce walks up to the plane, pulls out his 45, waves it at the pilot and says, open up all the doors. Gets in there, waves it around in the passengers and goes, you, out. Told some poor guy to get out of the plane. You have to wait next to a week until another plane comes. And he had the German guy get on the plane. So here's your ride back to Germany or to the airport. My jaw dropped. I couldn't believe it. I thought all that I have in B movies, but this was real. I said, thank God Bruce was on my payroll.
Right.
I was paying him more than anybody else.
Did you notice while you were talking there, Steve, our Chinese friend said he's got some information about Buddha and something there. He typed it. And
Oh yeah, I see. I'm reading it right now. He's reading the book. Great. Well, maybe he knows anything about Chinese history and the legends and stories of Chinese coming to America a long, long time ago, before Columbus. Because that's a subject that we're interested in.
Right. Well, if he wants to get in touch with us, we'd love to talk to him.
Right.
He does have his microphone on.
Yeah.
So.
I wonder if it's somebody we know.
Don't know.
There's always a mystery.
I don't know. It'd be nice to see what he can add about the Buddha down there.
He has. Oh, I see. I didn't see this one. I do have info on the Buddhist monk to America, Chinese sect. Oh, he doesn't have a phone to share.
Oh.
A Buddhist monk to America. Well, we know about Buddhist monks from Japan that allegedly went to America in the 1200s and settled in with the Zunis in New Mexico. There's a book called The Zuni Enigma, written by an archaeologist, Nancy
Yaw Davis.
Right. And that's why all of us went to Zuni to try and talk to the Zuni people about it. So I don't know if you're referring to the Buddhist monks from Japan or Buddhist monks from China. Oh, Chinese monk came in 5th century. Who would that be, John?
Well, that would be Hui Shen. Supposedly, there were 5 of them. They came out of, kind of more like out of Tibet, out of that region. And, of course, traversed across China and then over to here. But they were kind of out of the Nepal, Tibet area.
They went to
that was in
the
499,
Eskimos, right?
Yeah, that was 499 AD.
Do you have? I'm speaking to the person writing in Chinese. Do you have the name of the monk? Is there a name, or can we have our associate who's from China contact you and ask you about that? If it's in Chinese, she could obviously read it.
Well, Steve, one of the things I wanted to ask, you said those benches or whatever that you were finding had writings on them.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Were you able to get any pictures of that, or?
Well, I showed you little snippets of it.
Okay.
I have
Well,
more pictures, but
there was one of them that looked like the Olmec.
Well, as I was saying, the head Honduran archaeologist who's been working there now for 7 years, he just put out, it's in Spanish, a 2-hour Zoom call outlining everything they've learned to date. And one of the enigmas has been, we spotted these emojis or glyphs, whatever you want to call them. They don't look like Mayan glyphs because they don't have faces and stuff. They're just geometric shapes. And I had proposed the idea that it was a language, and at first everybody poo-pooed the idea. But then they came around, and now they're saying they've been comparing it to early Olmec script. So the very earliest Olmec scripts are very similar to those geometric patterns that you saw. You saw 3 of them. One was like a Celtic cross, like a knot, a Celtic knot.
Right,
right. Knot. And the other was an X. And it seems those are pretty prolific all over ancient Mesoamerica. And they have these other ones that I don't know what you'd call them. They're just these bizarre figures. And on his little dissertation, he talks about what they mean. So if you want, if any of you are fluent in Spanish, I could send you the link. It's on YouTube.
Yeah, I'd love to get that link.
Yeah. You understand Spanish?
I do speak a little Spanish, yes.
More than mine?
Yeah, not sure.
Trace tacos.
Yes.
So I'd really like to know, I'd like to know more from our Chinese friend, or at least the one that has the Chinese name.
I also see here a note from Jeff that he's a guide at Casa Malpais.
He's what?
Richard and I have done some research there in connection with the large Quetzalcoatl and the plumed serpent, which tied into what you found there, Steve. So it'd be interesting to get more from Jeff.
Well, I guess everybody is being mum.
I guess you scared him.
Wait, here's a comment just came in.
Oh, there we go. It comes.
Oh, it's my first time to join. John has my email and phone number.
Okay, then I know that is our good friend and fellow researcher who went out to me, Steve, out by you to Barstow. That's Walter Coe. He lives in San Lorenzo, California.
Uh-huh.
And Walter went out with me and we explored jointly the artifacts and out there at Surprise Tank, which is outside of Barstow.
Right.
And yeah, Walter had a lot of fun out there. He kept saying Chinese, Chinese, Chinese as he was looking at the petroglyphs. So yeah, I can get that information to you.
I have Bing contact him?
Oh, that would be excellent.
Yeah. So Walter, I know you're listening, I think. So our colleague who John knows very well, and so does Richard, Bing Lee, she's from Beijing, but she lives here in LA. And she's a writer, and she's been part of my partner in this project about the ancient maritime stuff. So if it's okay with you, I'd love for you and Bing to talk to each other. You can rattle off in Chinese if you want, or English, it doesn't matter. But she's more up on Chinese history than I am.
Yeah, Bing's a lot of fun. She interpreted that one petroglyph when you went out there in Albuquerque.
Exactly.
There's this one out there that I've been puzzled about for a decade or more, and she walked right up to it, and bingo.
Yeah, she
knew
was
what it was.
And then she sent it to her relatives and her friends in Beijing, and they all agreed with her.
Yeah,
remember that?
Yeah,
that was pretty amazing.
Got it confirmed. And,
so who knows
yes,
what mysteries are out there?
Well, I will get these two in contact and CC you and Richard and everyone so that we can exchange more.
Is Walter an academic, or like you and I, just likes this stuff?
No, he's Chinese.
Well, what I'm asking is he an academic?
He works for the government out there in California.
Okay.
And I'd like to get him to retire so he could do more with me, but he has good knowledge of the Chinese and the contacts and the associations out there.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Well, who knows what other mysteries are out there, especially over near Snowflake. You know, on the way to New Mexico, that whole area, the whole Four Corners area has got so many mysteries yet to be told.
Oh, yes. I think this meeting was very productive. We've got a lot of new contacts, and we've got a lot to talk about.
You know, I'm going to tell you a quick story before we bail out here. So I've been going up to Santa Barbara lately. You know, I'm a member of the Explorers Club. I'm the chapter chair, so I got to go. I visit everybody. And some of our members have actually lived most of their lives on the Channel Islands, and they're very into maritime history. They know a lot. And they're building a museum right now about it. So in Nancy Yaw Davis's book about the Zuni, she theorizes that they landed near Ventura and went up the Santa Clara River. Now, I know those of you that aren't familiar with the geography there, it doesn't mean anything. But there's this very nice river that is at the Pacific Ocean in Southern California, and it goes in one of the more fertile valleys for agriculture in this area. I mean, it has so much groundwater. It's a beautiful place. Now, you can't imagine a boat landing there now, but knowing that sea levels have varied by tens, if not hundreds of feet in the last thousands of years, it was a different coastline, but it was probably even more lush, more flora, more fauna. And you can follow this river all the way into the Mojave Desert. That's where it stops. And then you have to hook up with somebody who knows where the oases are and the trails. And I know, and John knows as well, having gone into the deserts, there are places that were wildly populated in much wetter times, and they still have trails that exist from the desert to the coast, and you can find beads made out of seashells for hundreds of miles. So people were going back and forth all the time in ancient times. So you can imagine someone from Asia landing at this place. It's a great place to have landed. They could easily survive in this valley, which must have had people, flora and fauna, water, everything you need, and go for 100 miles, easy street. Then you get in the desert and you hook up with the people who live there, and they show you how to go from one oasis to another, or it might have been more lush then anyway. It could have just been grasslands all the way to New Mexico. Certainly very feasible. Or they could have come up from Baja California up the Gulf of Mexico, and it's only a few hundred miles. I mean, up the Gulf of California. So there's a lot of interesting things yet to be found. Who's showing up there? Somebody actually turned on their camera.
Yeah, it was Jeff.
Jeff.
Shadow.
Very good.
Well, there definitely are a lot of mysteries, and I think we're dragging a few of them out of the ground and identifying them.
Well, one of them just turned on his camera.
Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, I just figured out how to get it turned on.
Oh,
Do you live in Springerville?
I actually live in Nutrioso, just southeast of Springerville. Yeah. I do have some questions about similarities between similarities in the languages between the Mayan people and the Hopi and the Zuni, and possibly that ancient people that was found where that city was found in Honduras. I know that there are some similarities between the Asian languages and Zuni people, so I'm just kind of curious if that carries over into the Mayan and the Honduran.
Well, that's a very good question, and it's a very debatable thing. A lot of people have studied that, and some people believe there is, some people believe there isn't. I'm not a linguist, so I couldn't tell you. I'm not that well versed in it. Maybe, John, you might know more than me because you've been studying that aspect.
Yeah, you summed it up pretty well, Steve. It's debatable. There's people on both sides. Some say that, like the Olmec, has some Chinese in it, maybe from the origin. But then there are others that say, no, it goes more with African. So it's still a hot topic for debate. But there are artifacts, even little things like wheeled toys and jaguars and traditions like putting a jade cicada in the mouth of the dead that tie these areas together with China. So there is some reasonable amount of, if you want to call it proof, I'm not sure you want to go that far, but similarities that indicate something was going on.
It's kind of like where there's smoke, there's fire. When I heard about the Lost City legends, most people thought it was bullshit. And, when I went there and I saw that petroglyph and I went, I think there's more truth than bullshit to it, and I got to figure it out. And I was fortunate I was able to find it so I could figure it out. But I think a lot of these things, some of them probably are just malarkey, but a lot of them are probably true. There's more truth than falsehoods to it. For example, in terms of traveling across the oceans, I met a guy a few months ago, another explorer type person, who built a 2,500-year-old Phoenician boat. Same materials, same construction techniques. He's a guy from Britain. He was in the Royal Navy. He sailed it from Carthage to Fort Lauderdale in 2019, proving that ancient Phoenicians had the ability to come to America. Doesn't mean they did. Now, there's a lot of legends from South America saying that they did, but one of the big concerns was, they don't have the technology to do it. There are also many people today, in fact, members of the Explorers Club, one of them just single-handedly rowed a boat, a rowboat, albeit a high-tech rowboat, but a rowboat by himself from Crescent City to the Philippines in the last 9 months. There was also 2 young women that just made a speed record rowing a canoe from California to Hawaii. And there are professional racing rowers that go across the Atlantic all the time and across the Pacific. So crossing the ocean, some academics will say, oh, no, it was impossible. Too dangerous, can't do it. Yeah, it could be dangerous, and I'm sure plenty of people died. But it's not impossible because people are doing it today with all kinds of watercraft, very basic ones. And archaeologists that John and I know have written books about people sailing for at least the last 50,000 years. Not necessarily across the big oceans, but in Southeast Asia and across smaller oceans. But of course, you can extrapolate. And we know the Chinese, for example, were masters of the Pacific for a very long period of time. They had great sailboats. So it's entirely plausible. And so did the Arabs. The Arabs were great mariners, and they worked with the Chinese in making their maps of the world. They shared their information.
I just finished a book not too long ago by John Turk called In the Wake of the Jomon, which is a story about his journey in a kayak from the Japanese islands up along the coast of Russia, the eastern coast of Russia into Siberia and basically up into Alaska, which talks about the feasibility of somebody actually circumnavigating the North Pacific into North America.
It's actually quite easy. It's been done a million times.
Yeah.
And now mainstream academia, like when we were in school, I said Columbus discovered America in 1492, regardless of the fact there are millions of people already living here. They all walked across the Bering Land Bridge. Well, now they go, well, the Bering Land Bridge was really difficult, particularly if there was ice there. But now they call it the Kelp Highway. Oh, yeah. They took boats across the Aleutians because the water level was lower, and they never had to go out of sight of land. So it was quite easy for them. And the circulation around the oceans, you can't miss. And you get down to Acapulco, it takes you right to the Philippines, the same thing. And the southern oceans have the same kind of circulation. The Atlantic has the same thing. So if you know when the right winds and the right currents are going, you sort of can't help but make it across, as long as you don't get, sunk in a storm or something.
Well, also White Sands, New Mexico, they found human footprints.
Right.
That they dated back to 23,000 years ago. So our timeline is now increased.
Well, there's a site in San Diego at the Museum of Man down there. They have the paleontologists have a display, and it's controversial, of course, but they found a, woolly mammoth or mastodon site, and they say the bones were all worked by humans, and those are dated at about 120,000 years ago.
Ooh,
and I think that, it's only a question of time and technology that we'll find out a lot of, we're going to find out a lot of things are a lot older than we think they were, and a lot of things are happening that we're just unaware of because we don't have the ability to see it. Just like no one could find the lost city that I found because they didn't have airborne LiDAR. It was too hard walking through the jungle. You just had to stumble on it if you were lucky. But now you can go with an airplane, and they're using this technology all over the world, finding lost cities by the dozen. In fact, in Guatemala, in the Pitan jungle, between all the great Maya sites like Chichen Itza and Tikal and all that, they thought there was not much between them. Well, the LiDAR guy whose picture I showed you, Juan Carlos, in 2016, he was commissioned by the Mexican government to fly, and the Guatemalan government to fly LiDAR over the Mayan areas. They found that entire jungle was totally urbanized, like one suburb, one town after another with roads and farms. And now the mainstream archaeologists have upped the ancient Mayan population by 10 or 20 million. So when you look at the jungle today, you go, even the Amazon, we look at the Amazon today and we think it always looked the way it looked now, but no. They used to say there were no ancient civilizations of any consequence there. Now with LiDAR and unfortunately deforestation, they're finding there were huge settlements there. People modified the environments and the climates were different. So things are constantly changing. And we just have to have an open mind as to what was there. So who knows what you're going to find in Snowflake?
Well, now that we're kind of in a drought,
Chicago, we got it.
Clearly, the history of migration is a lot different than what we learned when we were in school.
Absolutely.
Clearly.
Yeah. I mean, it's changing quite a bit because of technology. That's where all the new stuff is going to happen. Like in marine archaeology, I spoke to about 40 marine archaeologists that are in the Explorers Club a few months ago. Young people in their 30s and 40s, and they're using all these new technologies, and they're finding all over all the continental shelves ancient settlements in hundreds of feet of water all around the world that we never knew existed. So those, these weren't aquamen living under the water. Those areas were above water, 5,000 to 6,000 years ago or less.
Not the lost city of Atlantis.
Well, who knows? It's always been a joke, but maybe someone will find it. There was written up in Archaeology magazine a few months ago, between Great Britain and Denmark is a part of the North Sea called Doggerland. And for years, fishermen were dragging in their nets Neolithic artifacts. And they figured, oh, they must have fallen off a boat or something. Well, now, thanks to technology, they understood that the water level, it's under the bottom of the North Sea there is about 200 feet. They're finding that 8,000 years ago, that was above ground. And on the seafloor now, they found all these villages and towns and roads and farms and everything else. So, nature kind of does like what we build a reservoir, we flood out a town, and as long as the water is there, it's flooded. So nature flooded these areas, the changing climate and whatever, and they were buried thousands of years ago. And because of our new technology, we're finding this stuff. The same off the coast here in California. They're finding these ancient settlements in the sediments on the bottom of the ocean. And you couldn't find 20, 30 years ago. You didn't have the technology to do it.
Yeah, we're living in a very exciting era.
Right, so hopefully the world lasts long enough for us to learn more about it.
Right.
I want to show you one last thing here before I go. A couple things. First, I told you about the children's book, and you saw Lost City book. Nat Geo came out with the book a few months ago. This one, Lost Cities, Ancient Tombs, 100 Discoveries That Changed the World. And much to my great surprise, the Lost City was one of them. Not that the site itself was so astounding, but we were the first one to use LiDAR as a tool of discovery. So that changed the world because now everyone's doing it. Then, oops. If any of you are interested in what John, Richard, and I were talking about, ancient maritime stuff, we have a friend named Dr. Stephen Jett, who's sort of the sensei of this subject. He's been studying it for over 60 years. He actually wrote my college anthropology book in 1970, and he's still going. This is his book, if you want to get it. It's expensive, but it really sums up the stuff. Wouldn't you say, John?
Oh, excellent. Steve is quite a scholar, world-renowned.
Ancient Ocean Crossings.
It's a beautiful book.
He sums it up better than anybody. He sort of compiled all the research. This book was written in 2017. He's got another one he's almost done with now, a sort of updated version. But if you like the subject, this is a good primer. And then there's John wrote a book about petroglyphs.
Well, there's a couple things, not to go on too long, but the Hopi have a folklore, a tradition that their ancestors came over from the west, that is across the Pacific, on the back of 7 turtles.
Right, the Aleutian Islands.
The Aleutian Islands, yeah, island hopping, just as you outlined there a bit before, Steve. And so there's a lot of loose ends out here that can be tied together.
Well, from South America, they've legends about, and what Thor Heyerdahl thought back in the 40s when he proved you could sail a raft. He thought that indigenous Americans were the first Polynesians. They went out to Polynesia and settled the islands. Now the thought is that they actually started in Taiwan and had a diaspora from there. But just recently, and of course no one knows which direction this was, a skeleton dated from the 1200s was found in the Marquesas Islands in Polynesia, and it had North American indigenous DNA in it. So how did that happen in the 1200s? Somebody went somewhere. They went both ways. And they certainly didn't fly. They didn't swim. They didn't walk across the Bering Strait and then walk all the way around and then take another 5 boats.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't invent writing early enough so that we can get some of that history written down. So some of that history is lost.
Walter is commenting here. I'm reading his comments. Walter, it's very interesting. You want to know about the Chumash. I have a lot of contacts in that world. You can contact me if you want to know. And in fact, a month ago, we did an Explorers Club event with the main curator from the Santa Barbara Natural History Museum, who's an expert in it. And we went to visit a Chumash site right on the ocean. We spent the whole afternoon there. So if you want to know more about that, I'm more than happy to turn you on to my contacts. So you know how to reach me. All right. Well, it's been wonderful chatting with everybody. I hope you enjoyed it.
Well, Steve, I definitely want to thank you for spending some time with us, and you sure piqued some interest on everybody. So with that, does anybody else have something to say?
I enjoyed it very much. Thank you so much.
And thank you for showing us the Northern Lights. I like
You
that.
bet.
And
Right outside my window.
Richard or someone in the Agave group is going to find a Phoenician artifact somewhere in the desert in Arizona.
I hope
I can
so.
call the guy in England and say, see, the Phoenicians made it there.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much.
Okay. Oh, who just popped on there with the glasses that are shining in blue, the reflection?
That you, Max?
That's
Deb.
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 That was me.
All right. Well, I'll see you all another time. It was a lot of fun.
Okay.
Feel free to contact me anytime. I got lots of stories, lots of info, and happy to share it with anybody.
Okay, well, thank you
See y'all
much.
later. Take
And
care.
with that, I'll go ahead and end the meeting for all.